Tabitha Grayson cradled her bruised wrist as the stagecoach rattled along the dusty trail toward Silver Creek, Wyoming. The year was 1876, and she was running not just from Chicago, but from the shadow of a man whose fists had left more than physical marks on her body and soul. The bruises that mottled her skin like a tragic watercolor were only the visible signs of what she'd endured. Last stop before Silver Creek, the driver hollered from above, his voice barely audible over the crunch of wheels on the hardened earth. Tabitha pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders despite the summer heat, ensuring that the purple and yellow marks were hidden from the prying eyes of her fellow passengers. A well-dressed businessman had been stealing glances at her throughout the journey, his curiosity about the young woman traveling alone painfully evident. "You have business in Silver Creek, miss?" he finally asked, breaking the tense silence inside the coach. "My aunt runs a millinery shop there," Tabitha lied smoothly, having practiced the story countless times in her mind. There was no aunt. There was no shop. There was only the desperate need to disappear somewhere her husband's connections couldn't reach. The stagecoach rolled into Silver Creek just as the afternoon sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the single wide street that comprised the heart of town. Tabitha stepped down, her worn leather boots landing in the dust as she clutched her single carpetbag to her chest like a shield. Silver Creek was exactly what she had hoped for, small enough to hide in, big enough not to stand out. The main street boasted a general store, a saloon, a small hotel, and an assortment of other establishments that served the surrounding ranches and mines. Perfect anonymity awaited her here. "Need help with that bag, madam?" the stagecoach driver offered, but Tabitha shook her head. "I can manage, thank you." Her voice was soft but firm, the voice of a woman who had learned that accepting help often came with a price she wasn't willing to pay. The Silver Creek Hotel stood at the far end of the street, its weathered sign swinging gently in the breeze. Tabitha made her way there, ignoring the curious glances of townsfolk unaccustomed to seeing new faces, especially unaccompanied women. The hotel proprietress, a stout woman with graying hair twisted into a severe bun, eyed Tabitha with suspicion as she requested a room. "Just you?" she asked, peering over wire-rimmed spectacles. "Yes, just me." "I've come to stay with my aunt, but her home isn't ready yet," Tabitha continued her fabrication smoothly. "I'll need a room for a few days." The woman's eyes softened slightly. "That'll be 50 cents a night, includes breakfast. I'm Mrs. Holloway. Your aunt's name?" Tabitha's heart raced. "Mrs. Wilson," she said, selecting the most common surname she could think of. Mrs. Holloway seemed satisfied with this answer, or at least uninterested in pursuing it further. "Room 3, top of the stairs. Breakfast at 6 sharp." Tabitha thanked her and climbed the narrow staircase, her legs trembling with exhaustion. Once inside the sparsely furnished room, she sank onto the edge of the bed and allowed herself to truly breathe for the first time in days. Her fingers traced the yellowing bruise on her cheekbone, the one she had concealed with powder before boarding the stagecoach. Then there were the ones on her arms, her ribs, her back, a map of pain inflicted by Harold Grayson, the man who had promised to cherish her. Tabitha unpacked her meager belongings, including the money she had secretly saved over the past year, just enough to start over. Tomorrow she would look for work. A woman alone couldn't afford to remain idle, especially one with secrets. Morning arrived with the sound of roosters and the early stirrings of a town coming to life. Tabitha dressed carefully in her best though still modest dress, a dark blue cotton that showed little of her travel wear. She arranged her chestnut hair in a simple knot at the nape of her neck, applied powder to conceal the fading marks on her face, and headed downstairs for breakfast. "There's a position open at the general store," Mrs. Holloway informed her as she served a plate of eggs and bacon. "Mr. Peterson lost his assistant last month when she married a rancher from up north. If you're looking for work, that is." Tabitha couldn't believe her luck. "Yes, I am, thank you for telling me." Peterson's general store sat in the middle of Main Street, its wide porch already occupied by two old men playing checkers despite the early hour. Tabitha squared her shoulders and entered, the bell above the door announcing her presence. Mr. Peterson turned out to be a thin man with kind eyes and a perpetual frown of concentration. He looked up from his ledger when Tabitha approached the counter. "Mrs. Holloway sent me," she began. "I understand you're in need of an assistant." The storekeeper studied her for a moment. "Can you read and write, count money, lift moderately heavy items?" "Yes to all, sir." "Ever worked in a store before?" "No, but I learn quickly," Tabitha promised. Mr. Peterson scratched his chin thoughtfully. 6 days a week, 8 until 6, with an hour for lunch, $3 a week. Trial period of 2 weeks. It wasn't much, but it would keep her housed and fed. "When may I start?" "Right now, if you're amenable. Store needs dusting, then I'll show you the inventory system." By midday, Tabitha's arms ached from reaching high shelves and moving merchandise, but the physical labor was almost a relief, straightforward pain, honestly earned with no malice behind it. Mr. Peterson proved to be a fair employer, patient with her questions and appreciative of her neat handwriting when she updated his ledgers. "You've got a good head for numbers," he commented as they paused for a brief lunch. "That'll serve you well here." Tabitha was about to respond when the bell above the door jangled and a tall figure entered, momentarily silhouetted against the bright sunlight outside. Her breath caught as an irrational fear gripped her. Had Harold found her already? But as the man stepped further into the store, Tabitha realized he was nothing like her husband. Tall and lean, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer sky, he moved with the easy grace of someone comfortable in his own skin. A worn leather hat sat atop dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck, and his clothes, though dusty from the trail, spoke of hard work rather than the artificial refinement Harold had always insisted upon. "Afternoon, Mr. Peterson," the man greeted, his voice a pleasant baritone. "Got that order ready for the Double J. Just finished putting it together this morning, Mr. Xander," Peterson replied. "And I've hired some help, as you can see. This is Miss," he paused, realizing he'd never asked for Tabitha's name. "Mrs. Grayson," Tabitha supplied quickly, deciding that maintaining her married status might provide additional protection, even as she inwardly flinched at keeping Harold's name. "Mrs. Grayson, this is Jackson Xander, foreman at the Double J Ranch just outside town." Jackson removed his hat, revealing the full effect of those striking blue eyes. "Madam," he acknowledged with a slight nod. Tabitha managed a small smile, keenly aware of how the sleeves of her dress concealed the bruises on her arms. "Mr. Xander." "Jackson will do fine," he said, his gaze lingering on her face for a moment longer than was strictly polite. Tabitha felt her cheeks warm and turned away, busying herself with straightening an already perfectly aligned row of canned goods. She could feel Jackson's eyes following her movements, and she wondered if he could somehow see through her carefully constructed facade to the broken woman beneath. Mr. Peterson broke the moment by hauling a large crate onto the counter. "Here's everything on Mr. Johnson's list. Tell him the new shipment of barbed wire will be in next week." Jackson nodded, returning his attention to business. He examined the contents of the crate before pulling out a leather pouch and counting out payment. Tabitha watched from the corner of her eye, noting the careful way he handled each coin, not with the flashy arrogance of a man showing off his wealth, but with the respect of someone who understood the value of hard-earned money. "Need a hand getting this to your wagon?" Peterson asked. "I can manage," Jackson replied, hefting the crate with apparent ease. He turned toward the door but paused beside Tabitha. "Welcome to Silver Creek, Mrs. Grayson. Hope you find what you're looking for here." There was something in his tone, a genuine warmth that caught her off guard. Before she could formulate a response, he was gone, the bell jangling in his wake. Mr. Peterson chuckled softly. "That's the most words I've heard Jackson Xander string together in one go in all the years I've known him. Usually man of few words, that one." Tabitha returned to her dusting, trying to ignore the flutter in her chest. It had been so long since a man had spoken to her with simple kindness, without expectation or threat lurking beneath the surface. The following weeks fell into a rhythm that brought Tabitha more peace than she'd known in years. She rose early, took breakfast at the hotel, and spent her days at the store. Mr. Peterson proved to be an excellent employer, and the work, though sometimes monotonous, gave her purpose. She learned the names and preferences of regular customers, mastered the inventory system, and even began making suggestions for new products that might appeal to the ladies of Silver Creek. She had saved enough to rent a small room above the dressmaker's shop, giving her a sense of permanence she hadn't dared hope for. The bruises on her body faded from purple to green to yellow before disappearing entirely, though the memories of how they came to be remained vivid. Jackson Xander visited the store every Saturday to collect supplies for the Double J Ranch. Tabitha found herself looking forward to these brief encounters, though she chided herself for such foolishness. She was still a married woman, regardless of how far she had run from her husband. And a man like Jackson, respected in the community and clearly successful in his position, would want nothing to do with a woman carrying such baggage if he knew the truth. Yet each week, Jackson found some reason to engage her in conversation, asking her opinion on which fabric would make the best shirt, or whether the new shipment of coffee was worth the extra cost. His questions were transparently unnecessary, but Tabitha found herself warming to this careful, unhurried attention. One particularly hot afternoon in late July, Tabitha was alone in the store when Jackson arrived earlier than his usual time. She looked up from the ledger she was updating, unable to hide her surprise. "Mr. Xander, you're not due until Saturday." He removed his hat, running a hand through hair damp with sweat. "Call me Jackson, please, and yes, I know, but we've got a situation at the ranch." One of the hands broke his arm, and Mr. Johnson asked if I could fetch some medical supplies. Tabitha immediately moved to gather what he might need: bandages, which Hazel laudanum for the pain. As she reached for a high shelf, the sleeve of her dress caught on a nail, tearing the fabric and exposing her forearm, and with it, the remnants of a fading bruise that still lingered like a shadow on her skin. She quickly pulled her arm down, but Jackson had already seen. His expression shifted from surprise to something darker, more complex. "That looks painful," he said quietly. Tabitha fumbled to roll her sleeve back down. "It's nothing. An accident with a crate last week." Jackson said nothing more, but she could feel the weight of his gaze as she finished gathering the supplies. When she handed him the package, their fingers brushed briefly, sending an unexpected warmth through her veins. $3.45, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. He counted out the money, then hesitated. "Mrs. Grayson, Tabitha, if I may, the town's having a social next Saturday evening, a dance to celebrate the founding of Silver Creek. I wondered if you might consider attending." Tabitha stared at him, caught completely off guard. "I don't dance, Mr. Xander." "Neither do I, truth be told," he admitted with a small smile. "But there's food and music, and it's a chance to meet people outside of business transactions." She should refuse. She had no business entertaining any man's attentions, not with her past following her like a shadow, and yet, "I'll consider it," she found herself saying. Jackson's smile broadened slightly. "I hope you do." He replaced his hat and nodded. "Good day, Mrs. Grayson." After he left, Tabitha pressed her hands against the counter to steady herself. The invitation had awakened something she thought had died the first time Harold had struck her hope, fragile and terrifying. That night, Tabitha examined her reflection in the small mirror above her wash basin. The bruise on her forearm was nearly gone, but others had left their marks in less visible ways. The slight stiffness in her right shoulder from when Harold had thrown her against a wall, the small scar at her hairline where his ring had cut her. The wariness in her eyes that hadn't been there when she was 20 and full of dreams. The town social loomed in her thoughts. She had a decent dress, the green one she'd packed as an afterthought when fleeing Chicago. But could she truly step into the light and pretend to be like other women, unburdened by the past? Saturday arrived with a perfect blue sky and a breeze that took the edge off the summer heat. Tabitha helped Mr. Peterson close the store early, then hurried to her room to prepare for the social. She washed her hair and pinned it in a style more elaborate than her usual practical knot, allowing a few curls to frame her face. The green dress fit better than she remembered, its color bringing out the amber flecks in her brown eyes. As the sun began its descent, painting the western sky in shades of gold and pink, Tabitha made her way to the town square where tables had been set up and lanterns hung from tree branches. A small band was tuning instruments on a makeshift platform, and children darted between adults who chatted in clusters around punch bowls and platters of food. Tabitha stood at the edge of the gathering, suddenly uncertain. She recognized faces from the store but knew few people well enough to approach them socially. Just as she was considering retreating to the safety of her room, a familiar voice spoke behind her. "You came." She turned to find Jackson standing there, hat in hand, dressed in clean clothes that transformed the working rancher into something altogether more striking. "I did," she acknowledged, her voice barely audible above the growing noise of the celebration. "You look beautiful," he said simply, and the sincerity in his voice made her blush. "Thank you. You clean up rather well yourself, Mr. Xander," he offered his arm. "Would you like some punch?" "I can't vouch for the taste. Sheriff Miller tends to be heavy-handed with the lemons, but it's tradition to at least try it." Tabitha hesitated only briefly before placing her hand on his arm. "I suppose one must respect tradition." They moved through the crowd, Jackson nodding greetings to people as they passed. Tabitha was acutely aware of the curious glances directed their way, a reminder that in a town this size, nothing went unnoticed. The punch was indeed tart, but refreshing in the evening warmth. They stood sipping from their cups and watching as couples began to take to the open area in front of the band. "I meant what I said earlier," Jackson said after a comfortable silence had stretched between them. "I'm not much of a dancer." Tabitha smiled despite herself. "Neither am I, though I had lessons as a girl. My father insisted, said a lady needed to know how to move properly in society." The memory was bittersweet. Her father had died before seeing how his carefully raised daughter had ended up. "Were you from Chicago originally?" Jackson asked. Tabitha tensed. She had mentioned Chicago only once in passing to Mrs. Holloway. Word traveled fast in Silver Creek. "Yes," she answered carefully, "but that life feels very distant now." Jackson seemed to sense her discomfort and changed the subject. "Have you met Mrs. Landry yet?" "She runs the bakery and makes the best apple pie west of the Mississippi, according to her, at least." The evening progressed pleasantly as Jackson introduced her to various townspeople, each greeting her with the polite curiosity afforded to newcomers. As the night deepened and more lanterns were lit, the band struck up a slow waltz. "Would you care to dance?" Jackson asked, setting aside his empty cup. "I can't promise not to step on your toes, but I'll try my best." Something in his earnest expression made refusal impossible. Tabitha nodded and allowed him to lead her to the edge of the dancing area, where he placed one hand respectfully at her waist, the other taking her right hand in his. As they began to move to the music, Tabitha was surprised to discover that Jackson had underplayed his abilities. He moved with the same natural grace she had noticed that first day in the store, guiding her gently through the steps without the controlling force she had come to expect from a man's hands. "You dance quite well for someone who claims not to," she observed. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "My mother insisted all her sons learn, said it was as important as knowing how to ride or shoot." A wise woman. "She was," he agreed, a flicker of sadness crossing his features. "She passed 5 years ago." "I'm sorry," Tabitha said softly, understanding loss all too well. They continued to dance, and Tabitha found herself relaxing into the rhythm, into the warmth of Jackson's presence. For a few precious moments, she wasn't a runaway wife hiding from her past. She was simply a woman enjoying a summer evening with a man whose blue eyes held no threats, only gentle interest. The music eventually ended, and Jackson led her to a quieter spot near the edge of the square, where wooden benches had been placed beneath a large oak tree. The sounds of the social continued, but here they could speak without raising their voices. "Thank you for the dance," Tabitha said as they sat side by side, leaving a proper distance between them. "The pleasure was mine," Jackson replied. He hesitated, then continued, "I hope this isn't forward of me, but I've been meaning to ask, are you truly a widow, Mrs. Grayson?" The question hit Tabitha like a physical blow. She stared at him, her mind racing. "Why would you ask such a thing?" Jackson's expression remained kind, but his eyes were searching. "Several reasons. You never speak of your late husband, you wear no wedding band. And when you arrived in Silver Creek, you seemed afraid." Tabitha's hands trembled in her lap. "Mr. Xander, please," he interrupted gently. "I'm not asking to pry or to judge, but I've seen the marks on your arms, the way you flinch when someone moves too quickly near you. I recognize the signs." A lump formed in Tabitha's throat. "How could you possibly, my sister?" Jackson explained quietly. "She was married to a man who hurt her for 3 years before she found the courage to leave. I helped her escape to California." Tears welled in Tabitha's eyes. She blinked them back fiercely, unwilling to break down in public. "I should go," she whispered, starting to rise. Jackson made no move to stop her physically, but his words halted her. "Whatever you're running from, Tabitha, you're safe here." She sank back onto the bench, suddenly too weary to maintain the pretense any longer. "I'm not a widow," she admitted in a voice so low Jackson had to lean closer to hear. "My husband is very much alive in Chicago, a respected businessman with friends in high places, and he hurt you." It wasn't a question. Tabitha nodded, unable to look at him. "For 3 years. At first it was only when he drank, but then, it didn't matter whether he was sober or not. Anything could set him off, a meal not to his liking, a word spoken at the wrong time. He was careful, though. Always where it wouldn't show when I was dressed." The admission hung between them in the soft evening air. Tabitha waited for the disgust, the pity, or worse, the blame that she had somehow invited such treatment. Instead, Jackson's voice came low and steady. "You were brave to leave. Not everyone finds that courage." A tear slipped down Tabitha's cheek despite her best efforts. "I'm still his wife in the eyes of the law. If he finds me, he won't," Jackson said with such conviction that Tabitha finally looked up at him. "Silver Creek is a long way from Chicago, and folks here look after their own. I'm hardly one of their own." "You're becoming so," he countered. "Mr. Peterson can't stop singing your praises. Mrs. Holloway tells anyone who'll listen how you helped her sort out her accounting books. And the Miller twins think you're the most fascinating person to come through town since that traveling magician last spring." A small laugh escaped Tabitha, despite the heaviness in her chest. "The Miller twins are 8 years old and fascinated by my accent." "Still counts," Jackson smiled, then grew serious again. "Your secret is safe with me, Tabitha, but you should know that you have nothing to be ashamed of. The shame belongs to the man who broke his vows to protect and cherish you." Something in the way he said it, with a quiet, assured conviction rather than empty platitudes, reached a part of Tabitha that had been walled off for too long. The tears came in earnest now, though she tried to hide them with her handkerchief. Jackson respectfully averted his gaze, giving her a moment to compose herself. When she had dried her eyes, he offered his arm once more. "May I walk you home? The hour grows late." Tabitha accepted, and they left the social, moving through the quieter streets of Silver Creek in companionable silence. When they reached the staircase that led to her room above the dressmaker's shop, Tabitha paused. "Thank you for your kindness tonight," she said, "and for your discretion." Jackson nodded. "Would it be too forward to call on you properly? Perhaps Sunday after church?" The question surprised her. Even knowing my situation, his blue eyes were steady on hers. "Especially knowing your situation, I admire your courage, Tabitha. And I'd like the chance to know you better, if you're willing." Tabitha considered his words. She had not come to Silver Creek looking for romance, indeed, had believed herself incapable of ever trusting a man again. Yet here was Jackson Xander, offering not passionate declarations or demanding gestures, but simple respect and the chance to begin anew. "Sunday after church would be fine," she said at last. His smile was warm. "I'll look forward to it. Good night, Tabitha." "Good night, Jackson." As summer deepened into autumn, Tabitha found herself cautiously opening to the possibility of happiness. Jackson called on her regularly, their Sunday afternoons often spent walking along the creek that gave the town its name or sharing quiet meals at the hotel restaurant. He never pushed for more intimacy than she was comfortable with, never made her feel that his attention came with expectations. They talked about everything and nothing: his work at the ranch, her growing responsibilities at the store, books they had read, places they hoped to see. Gradually, Tabitha shared more about her life before Silver Creek, her childhood in Boston, her father's death that had left her mother struggling financially, her introduction to Harold Grayson, who had seemed like salvation to a young woman with limited prospects. "He was charming at first," she explained one crisp October afternoon as they sat on a blanket beneath a cottonwood tree, the leaves above them a brilliant gold against the blue sky. "Attentive, generous. My mother was thrilled when he proposed after only 3 months of courtship. She thought she was securing my future." Jackson listened without interrupting, his expression thoughtful. "When did it change?" Tabitha plucked a blade of grass, twisting it between her fingers. "The first time was 2 weeks after the wedding." I had dinner waiting, but he arrived home late and drunk. The food was cold and he struck me across the face, apologized profusely the next day, brought flowers, swore it would never happen again. She laughed bitterly. I believed him. The second time, I believed him less. By the third, I knew it was only the beginning. Why did you stay as long as you did? Jackson asked, not accusingly but with genuine curiosity. Many reasons. Fear, primarily. Harold made it clear what would happen if I tried to leave. But also shame, what kind of woman couldn't make her marriage work, and practical concerns. I had no money of my own, nowhere to go. My mother had passed by then, and Harold had systematically isolated me from friends. She sighed. Eventually, I realized I would die there if I didn't leave. So I started planning, saving small amounts when I could, learning train schedules, choosing a destination as far from Chicago as my limited funds could take me. Jackson reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement, and covered her hand with his own. I'm glad you found your way here. The simple touch, freely given and easily withdrawn if unwelcome, moved Tabitha deeply. So am I. As winter approached, bringing with it shorter days and a chill to the air, Tabitha found herself thinking of Jackson even when they were apart, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, the careful consideration he gave her opinions, the strength in his hands that he never used to intimidate or control. They had not discussed the future, both seemingly content to let their relationship unfold naturally. But Tabitha knew she was falling in love with him, even as she feared the complications her marital status presented. The first snow of the season arrived in early December, transforming Silver Creek into a wonderland of white. Tabitha gazed out the store window at the gently falling flakes, lost in thought. Beautiful, isn't it? Mr. Peterson remarked as he joined her. Though it means business will be slow today, people tend to stay close to home when the weather turns. As if to prove him wrong, the door opened, bringing with it a swirl of snowflakes and a blast of cold air. But it wasn't a customer who entered, it was Sheriff Miller, his expression grave beneath his snow-dusted hat. Miss Tabitha, he said, nodding to her, could I have a word? A chill that had nothing to do with the weather ran through her. Of course, Sheriff. Peterson tactfully busied himself at the far end of the store as the sheriff approached the counter. Got a telegram today, Miller said without preamble. From Chicago, man named Harold Grayson asking if we've seen his wife, Tabitha. Says she's troubled in the mind, ran off with family valuables. Tabitha gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles white. I see, the sheriff studied her face. Now, I don't know the particulars of your situation, Miss Tabitha, but I've been sheriff here for 15 years. I know troubled when I see it, and you're the furthest thing from it. As for valuables, he glanced pointedly at her simple dress and unadorned hands, doesn't seem like you're living high on stolen goods. Relief washed over her, but it was short-lived. What did you tell him? Nothing yet. Thought I should talk to you first. Tabitha took a deep breath. Sheriff Miller, the door opened again and Jackson entered, stomping snow from his boots. He took one look at Tabitha's face and was instantly alert. What's happened? Sheriff Miller repeated the information about the telegram. Jackson's jaw tightened, a muscle working in his cheek. You're not sending a response, he said, more statement than question. Miller looked between them. Legally, I should inform a husband of his wife's whereabouts. She has bruises, Tom, Jackson said quietly. Had them when she arrived, the kind a man gives, not an accident. The sheriff's weathered face softened as he turned back to Tabitha. That true, miss? Tabitha nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Miller sighed heavily. Seems to me telegrams can get lost, especially in winter. Lines go down all the time with the snow. Thank you, Tabitha whispered. Don't thank me yet, the sheriff cautioned. If he's determined enough, he might come looking himself. Silver Creek isn't exactly hidden. Jackson moved to stand beside Tabitha, his presence solid and reassuring. If he does, he'll find that Tabitha has friends here. The sheriff nodded, seeming satisfied. Well then, I'll leave you folks to your day. Miss Tabitha, Mr. Xander. He touched the brim of his hat and departed, the bell jangling in his wake. The moment the door closed, Tabitha's composure cracked. A sob escaped her and she covered her mouth with her hand. Jackson was there immediately, his arm around her shoulders. It's all right, he murmured. You're safe. Mr. Peterson appeared with a glass of water and a concerned frown. Take her to the back room, he suggested. I'll mind the store. Jackson guided Tabitha through the curtain that separated the store from the small storage area. Once they were alone, she allowed herself to fully break down, years of fear and tension releasing in a flood of tears. Jackson held her gently, making no attempt to hush her or minimize her distress. When the storm of emotion finally passed, Tabitha pulled away embarrassed. "I'm sorry, I don't apologize," Jackson interrupted softly. "You've been carrying this fear for a long time." It's natural to react when it suddenly becomes real again. She wiped her eyes with a handkerchief. "What am I going to do if he comes here? I can't face him, Jackson. I can't go back to that life." "You won't have to," Jackson promised. "We'll figure this out together." The certainty in his voice calmed her somewhat. "Why are you helping me like this? You barely know me." Jackson considered her question seriously. "I know enough. I know you're kind and intelligent. I know you work hard and treat people with respect. I know you've endured things that would break many people, yet you still find reasons to smile." He paused, then added quietly, "And I know I'm falling in love with you." Tabitha stared at him, stunned by the simple declaration. "Jackson, you don't need to say anything," he assured her quickly. "I understand your situation is complicated. I just want you to know where I stand. Whatever comes next, you're not alone in this." Tears welled in her eyes again, but of a different nature. "I think I'm falling in love with you too," she admitted, "but I'm still legally bound to another man." "It's not fair to you." "Let me worry about what's fair to me," Jackson said. "For now, let's focus on keeping you safe." The weeks that followed were tense as Tabitha waited for Harold to appear in Silver Creek, but Christmas came and went without any sign of him. Sheriff Miller received no further telegrams, and gradually, Tabitha began to hope that perhaps her husband had given up the search. Winter deepened, bringing harsh storms that isolated the town for days at a time. During one such blizzard in late January, Tabitha found herself trapped at the store overnight when the roads became impassable. Mr. Peterson had gone home early, leaving her to close up, but the storm had intensified more quickly than anyone anticipated. As she was contemplating whether to attempt the short but treacherous walk to her room, the door burst open, bringing with it a flurry of snow and a heavily bundled figure. "Jackson," she exclaimed as he unwound the scarf from his face. "What are you doing here? It's dangerous to be out in this." "Came to make sure you were safe," he said, stomping snow from his boots. "Figured you might be stuck here." The concern in his voice warmed her more than the store's pot-bellied stove. "I was just trying to decide whether to risk the walk home." "Not a good idea," Jackson advised, moving to the window. Through the frosted glass, they could barely make out the buildings across the street through the driving snow. "Looks like we're both staying put for the night." Tabitha nodded, simultaneously relieved at his presence and nervous about the impropriety of spending the night alone with him, even in such innocent circumstances. Jackson seemed to read her thoughts. "I'll stay out here by the stove. You can use Peterson's office if you'd like more privacy." "Thank you," she said softly. "But I'd rather have your company if you don't mind. It's a bit unnerving, listening to the wind howl like that." They spent the evening talking by the light of a single oil lamp, sharing stories of their childhoods and dreams for the future. Jackson spoke of his hope to one day have his own ranch, while Tabitha admitted she had begun to imagine a permanent life in Silver Creek. "I like who I am here," she explained. "In Chicago, I became smaller each day, less visible, less vocal, trying to avoid notice and therefore avoid his anger. Here, I feel like I'm finally becoming the person I was meant to be." Jackson nodded, understanding in his eyes. "You've bloomed here, like a flower that finally gets the sunlight it needs." As the night deepened and the temperature dropped despite the stove's efforts, they moved closer together for warmth, Jackson respectfully placing his coat around her shoulders. "Can I ask you something?" Tabitha ventured, watching the play of firelight on his features. "Anything." "The first time we danced, you said my name was beautiful. But later, when you saw the bruise on my arm, you didn't look disgusted or pitying." "Why?" Jackson was quiet for a long moment, considering her question. "Those marks are part of your story, Tabitha. They're proof of what you survived, what you had the courage to leave behind. There's a kind of beauty in that strength, even if it came at a terrible cost." His words touched something deep within her, a wound that had never properly healed. "No one has ever seen it that way before." "Then they weren't really looking," he said simply. Tabitha found herself moving closer to him, drawn by the genuine understanding in his eyes. When their lips met, it was gentle a question rather than a demand, an offering freely given and received. Spring arrived in Silver Creek with a riot of wildflowers and the promise of new beginnings. Tabitha had heard nothing more from Harold, though she remained cautious, never quite able to shake the fear that he might appear without warning. Jackson had become a constant in her life, his steady presence a balm to her wounded spirit. They had not repeated that kiss from the night of the blizzard, both acutely aware of the complications her marital status presented, but their feelings continued to deepen with each passing day. On a warm May afternoon, Tabitha was arranging a new display of fabric in the store window when the bell above the door jangled. She turned, expecting to see Mrs. Miller coming for her weekly purchase of sugar and tea. Instead, Harold Grayson stood in the doorway, as immaculately dressed as ever, his handsome face set in the coldly pleasant expression she had come to dread. "Hello, Tabitha," he said, removing his hat. "You've led me on quite a chase." Tabitha froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Harold." The name came out as barely more than a whisper. He stepped further into the store, glancing around with evident distaste. "So this is where you've been hiding, a dusty little shop in a backwater town. How quaint. What do you want?" Tabitha managed to ask, her voice stronger than she felt. "What do I want?" Harold's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I want my wife to return home where she belongs. I want the money you stole from me. I want to put this unfortunate episode behind us." "I didn't steal from you," Tabitha said, anger beginning to override her fear. "Every cent I took was earned by me, saved from the household allowance you so generously provided." Harold's expression hardened. "Your place is in Chicago, Tabitha. I'm prepared to overlook this indiscretion if you come home now without making a scene." Tabitha stood her ground, though her hands trembled. "This is my home now. I'm not going back with you, ever." Harold took another step toward her, his voice dropping to the dangerously soft tone she remembered all too well. "I don't think you understand your position. You are my wife. The law is on my side. If you refuse to come willingly, I'll have the sheriff arrest you for theft." "The sheriff already knows the truth," Tabitha countered, "as does everyone else in this town who matters. You've been spreading lies about me." Harold's face flushed with anger. "You always were ungrateful, never appreciating what I provided, never understanding the pressures I faced." "I understood perfectly," Tabitha interrupted. "I understood that nothing I did was ever good enough, that your moods determined whether I would end the day in pain or not, that you enjoyed having power over someone who couldn't fight back." Harold moved so quickly Tabitha barely had time to react. His hand closed around her wrist, squeezing with bruising force. "You're coming with me now. Let her go." Jackson's voice cut through the tension like a knife. Harold turned, keeping his grip on Tabitha's wrist. "This doesn't concern you." Jackson stood in the doorway, his expression dangerously calm. "I'm making it my concern. Let her go." "This woman is my wife," Harold said coldly. "Whatever she's told you, she's told me enough," Jackson interrupted, moving further into the store. "And I've seen the evidence of your love on her skin." Harold's grip tightened reflexively, making Tabitha wince. "You've been intimate with my wife," he demanded, his face contorting with rage. "He hasn't," Tabitha said quickly. "But he's been more of a man to me as a friend than you ever were as a husband." Harold raised his free hand, and Tabitha flinched instinctively, anticipating the blow, but it never came. Instead, Jackson crossed the distance between them with 2 swift strides and caught Harold's wrist mid-air. "That's not happening," Jackson said quietly. "Not here, not ever again." For a tense moment, the three of them stood frozen in a tableau of confrontation. Then Sheriff Miller's voice broke the silence from the doorway. "Everything all right in here, Miss Tabitha?" Harold released her instantly, his face smoothing into a pleasant mask. "Sheriff, I'm Harold Grayson. I believe you received my telegram some months ago about my missing wife." Miller stepped into the store, taking in the scene with experienced eyes. "I recall something of the sort." "You're saying this lady is your wife?" "She is," Harold confirmed, "and I've come to take her home to Chicago." The sheriff looked at Tabitha. "That what you want, miss?" "No," Tabitha said firmly. "I don't want to go anywhere with him." Harold laughed incredulously. "She doesn't have a choice." "She's my wife." "Seems to me everyone has choices," Miller said mildly. "Miss Tabitha chose to come to Silver Creek. She chose to become a valued member of our community, and now she's choosing not to go with you." Harold's pleasant facade began to crack. This is absurd. The law says I can't force a woman to go with a man she doesn't want to, the sheriff interrupted. Especially when that man has a history of laying hands on her in anger. She's lying, Harold snapped. Tabitha has always been prone to hysteria and fabrication. Ask anyone in Chicago, we're not in Chicago, Jackson pointed out, and here Tabitha's word carries weight. Harold's gaze darted between them, calculating. Fine, he said at last. If she wants to stay in this God-forsaken place, let her, but she'll get nothing from me, no divorce, no support. She'll be neither wife nor widow, unable to remarry or move on with her life. The words were meant to wound, and Tabitha felt their sting, but she lifted her chin. I've managed without your support for nearly a year now. I'll continue to do so. A new voice joined the conversation from the doorway. Perhaps I can offer a solution. Mr. Peterson entered, followed by a distinguished-looking gentleman Tabitha didn't recognize. This is Judge Wilson from the Territorial Court, Peterson explained. He happened to be passing through on circuit when we received word that Mr. Grayson had been spotted in the area. Judge Wilson nodded to the assembled group. I understand there's a dispute regarding a marriage. Harold straightened, clearly relieved to see someone of apparent authority. My wife has abandoned our home without cause, Your Honor. I've come to bring her back. Without cause, Jackson echoed incredulously. The judge held up a hand. I'd like to speak with Mrs. Grayson alone, if I may. Harold began to object, but Sheriff Miller took his arm firmly. Why don't we step outside while the ladies talk? Once they were alone, Judge Wilson's stern demeanor softened somewhat. Mrs. Grayson, I understand this is a difficult situation, but I need you to speak frankly. Has your husband ever caused you physical harm? Yes, Your Honor, Tabitha said without hesitation. Repeatedly over the course of our 3-year marriage, the judge nodded, unsurprised. And do you wish to return to Chicago with him? No, sir, I fear for my safety if I do. I see. The judge considered her for a moment. Mrs. Grayson, are you aware that the Dakota Territory has more progressive divorce laws than many states? Under certain circumstances, including cruelty, a wife may petition for divorce without her husband's consent. Hope flickered in Tabitha's chest. I wasn't aware, Your Honor. The process isn't simple, he warned. But it is possible, and given what I've heard and the evident support of the community, I believe your petition would be looked upon favorably. What would I need to do? Tabitha asked, hardly daring to believe this chance for freedom might be real. The judge explained the process, the paperwork required, the testimonies she would need to gather. It would take time, he cautioned, and Harold might contest it vigorously. But if successful, he concluded, you would be legally free to begin a new life, including remarriage, should you wish it. When the men were called back in, Harold's face darkened as Judge Wilson outlined the situation. This is preposterous, he sputtered. No court would grant a divorce based on a wife's unsubstantiated claims. Her claims aren't unsubstantiated, Jackson said quietly. I saw the bruises myself when she first arrived in Silver Creek. Others did too. Harold glared at him. And who exactly are you to involve yourself in my marriage, Jackson Xander? He replied simply. Foreman of the Double J Ranch and the man who intends to marry Tabitha when she's free to accept. Tabitha's heart skipped at the public declaration. She met Jackson's gaze, seeing in it not just love but absolute certainty. Harold laughed bitterly. So that's it. You found yourself a replacement already. I should have known you'd. That's enough, Judge Wilson interrupted. Mr. Grayson, I suggest you consider your position carefully. Fighting this divorce will be costly, time-consuming, and ultimately futile given the evidence and witnesses. Not to mention potentially damaging to your reputation in Chicago should the details become public. That struck home. Harold prided himself on his standing in Chicago society, on the respect he commanded in business circles. A public divorce with accusations of wife-beating would destroy much of what he valued. What are you proposing? He asked stiffly. An uncontested divorce, the judge said. You return to Chicago, sign the necessary papers when they arrive, and this matter is concluded quietly and efficiently. Harold's eyes narrowed as he considered the offer. His gaze moved to Tabitha, standing straight-backed beside Jackson. Something shifted in his expression, not remorse exactly, but perhaps recognition that he had truly lost his power over her. Fine, he said at last. Send the papers. I'll sign them, but don't expect anything else from me, no property, no money. I want nothing from you, Tabitha assured him, only my freedom. Harold retrieved his hat from the counter. Then we have nothing more to discuss. Good day, Judge, Sheriff, he paused, looking at Tabitha one last time. You'll regret this decision, Tabitha, that I promise you. With that, he departed, the bell jangling with finality. In the silence that followed, Tabitha felt a curious lightness, as if a weight she had carried so long she'd forgotten it was there had suddenly lifted from her shoulders. Well, Sheriff Miller said pragmatically, I'll see our visitor safely to the afternoon stage. Judge, perhaps you join me. As the men filed out, Jackson turned to Tabitha. I hope I didn't overstep, declaring my intentions that way. Tabitha shook her head, smiling despite the emotional exhaustion of the confrontation. You didn't. Though traditionally a proposal involves a question, Jackson's blue eyes crinkled at the corners. True enough. But I thought I'd wait to ask properly until you're free to say yes. A wise decision, she agreed. Then more seriously, do you think he'll honor his word, sign the papers? I think he will, Jackson said. Men like Harold value appearances above all. Fighting would only make him look worse. Tabitha nodded, allowing herself to believe that freedom might truly be within reach. I never imagined this moment would come standing up to him, having people believe me, support me. Jackson took her hand gently, his thumb brushing over her wrist where Harold's grip had left fresh marks. You deserve that support, you always did. His touch was tender as his fingers traced the forming bruise. Even these, they're part of your victory, Tabitha, proof of what you're leaving behind. Tears welled in her eyes at his words. Most people would see only ugliness in them. Then most people aren't looking deeply enough, Jackson said softly. I see courage, I see survival, I see beauty. Tabitha leaned forward, resting her forehead against his chest. Thank you, she whispered, for seeing me, all of me. Jackson's arms encircled her, strong yet gentle. Always, he promised. Always. Autumn returned to Silver Creek, painting the surrounding hills in golds and reds. Tabitha stood on the porch of a small house at the edge of town, watching as Jackson split firewood in the yard, the axe rising and falling in a steady rhythm. The divorce had been finalized in August, Harold keeping his word to sign the papers without contest. Judge Wilson had personally delivered the final decree on his return circuit, officially ending Tabitha's ties to her past. She fingered the simple gold band on her left hand, not Harold's, but one Jackson had placed there just 3 weeks ago in a small ceremony attended by the entire town. She was Tabitha Xander now, a name she had chosen freely, a life she had built from the ashes of the old. Jackson set aside the axe and approached the porch, wiping sweat from his brow despite the autumn chill. Enough wood to last us through winter, he announced, climbing the steps to join her. Good, she said, leaning into him as his arm circled her waist. I have a feeling it's going to be a cold one. We'll stay warm, he promised, pressing a kiss to her temple. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. Tabitha marveled at how far she had come in just over a year, from a frightened woman hiding bruises to someone who stood proudly in the light, scars and all. What are you thinking? Jackson asked, noticing her contemplative expression. About journeys, she replied. And how sometimes the hardest roads lead to the most beautiful destinations. Jackson smiled, understanding without need for further explanation. His hand moved to her shoulder, where the last lingering mark from Harold's grip had long since faded, leaving only smooth skin and memories that grew less painful with each passing day. Come inside, Tabitha said, taking his hand. I'll make us some tea before dinner. As they entered their home, a small house filled with simple furniture and immeasurable happiness, Tabitha felt a sense of completion she had once thought impossible. Here in Silver Creek with Jackson, she had found not just safety but joy, not just absence of pain but presence of love. She had arrived broken, her body marked by a past she couldn't escape. But Jackson had shown her that even those marks held beauty, the beauty of survival, of courage, of a woman who had walked through fire and emerged stronger on the other side. And in that understanding, in that acceptance of all that she was, Tabitha had found the most precious gift of all, the knowledge that she was, and always had been, worthy of love.